we're going to be tackling the four beauties of ancient China,
Ooh,
a topic that one of you lovely listeners specifically requested.
excellent.
Yeah, you were curious about where this whole concept of the four beauties even came from,
Right.
and how much of the lore surrounding them is actually, rooted in history.
Mm-hmm.
Let me tell you, I was surprised by some of the things I learned.
Oh, wonderful.
So to jump right in,
Yeah.
the familiar grouping that we all know of, Xishi, Dao Chan, Wang Xiaojun, and Yang Guifei,
Okay.
as the four beauties.
It's actually a much more recent idea than you might think.
More recent. Really?
Yeah.
I kind of assumed that this was like something passed down for centuries,
Right.
like an ancient proverb.
You would think so, yeah.
What makes you say that it's more recent?
Well, this specific combination doesn't appear until a collection of folk ballads
Okay.
that were published in 1828
Wow.
during the Qing Dynasty.
So that's really not that long ago.
No, it's right on the eve of the Opium War.
Wow.
This idea of the four beauties is just starting to solidify.
So it wasn't some, like ancient text or official decree or anything.
Right.
It was more like street corner gossip
Yeah.
that eventually got written down.
It's pretty unexpected.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and the first mention is actually quite humorous.
Oh,
It connects each of the four beauty to a man known for his impressive facial hair.
facial hair.
Yeah, a bushy beard.
A bushy beard. That's definitely not the image that I had in mind.
Right. It implies that Xishi was sent to the king of Wu, who had a bushy beard.
Okay.
Huang Xiaojun left behind an emperor with a bushy beard. Yang Guifei partied with An Lushan, another bushy-bearded fellow.
Uh-huh.
And even the fictional Dao Chan was linked to the bushy-bearded Dong Zhuo.
Wow. So bushy beards were really in back then.
It was a style at the time.
Yeah, it's a far cry from the romantic image that we usually associate with these women.
Very much so.
But if it's a collection of folk ballads, does that mean that there were, like, other versions of the Four Beauties circulating before this one became so popular?
Absolutely. Oral tradition is fluid.
Right.
And there were other groupings that emphasized different aspects of beauty.
Okay.
One version includes Daji, known for fierce beauty.
Okay.
Baosi, whose smile was said to have launched 1,000 ships.
Wow.
The love snake Xishi.
Okay.
And Yang Guifei, famous for her beauty while intoxicated.
So each woman embodied, like, a specific kind of beauty.
Yes.
Almost like an archetype tied to their emotional state.
Precisely. It wasn't just about physical appearance, but about the impact of their beauty in different contexts.
That's interesting.
Daji's fury, Baosi's laughter, Shishi's heartache, Yang Guifei's carefree intoxication, they all held a certain allure.
That makes me wonder if, like, our modern focus on, like, singular standardized beauty standards might be missing out on some of the nuances and complexities of how beauty was appreciated in the past.
That's a really thought-provoking point.
Yeah.
And you're right, as literacy increased and written texts became more widespread, there was a push for more definitive answers, even in eras like this where oral tradition had thrived on multiple perspectives.
So the concept of the Four Beauties as we know it today
Right.
is actually a product of these desire for, like, a single correct answer.
It's a fascinating example of how cultural trends and ways of thinking
Yeah.
shape our perceptions, even about something as subjective as beauty.
It really is fascinating.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned Dao Chan being a fictional character.
Mm-hmm.
What about Xishi? Her story, sacrificing her love to bring down a kingdom, sounds incredibly dramatic.
Oh, it does.
Is there any historical truth to it?
This is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
That popular romantic narrative about Xishi and family is largely a fabrication.
Oh, really?
Yeah, to understand what really happened,
Right.
we need to look at a source called Zuo Zhuan,
Zuo Zhuan.
which is considered the most reliable historical account of the Wu-Yue conflict.
What makes Zuo Zhuan a more reliable source than other texts from that time?
It's considered the closest to a contemporary account we have of this period,
Gotcha.
offering a more grounded perspective
Okay.
compared to later texts that tend to embellish the story.
Right.
Zuo Zhuan paints a picture of King Fuchai of Wu as a powerful ruler with ambitions of expanding his territory.
It sounds like a lot of rulers.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
He decides to attack the state of Qi to the north,
Okay.
seeing it as an easier target than Chu or Yu.
Makes sense.
He even has a canal dug, the Hangu Canal, to make this possible.
Wasn't that canal later incorporated into the Grand Canal?
It was...
That's a pretty significant undertaking.
It is. It shows just how ambitious Fuchai was.
Wow.
But this decision to attack Qi backfires.
Oh, no.
Yeah, making enemies of the other major powers, Jin, Chu, and Qi, who then decide to support Yu against Wu.
Classic overreach.
Classic overreach leading to downfall.
Yep, but where does Xishi fit into all of this?
Here's the thing. Xishi is completely absent from Zuo Zhuan and other early records of this period.
So the central figure in this supposed beauty trap
Right.
is nowhere to be found in the most accurate historical source.
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah, it's surprising, isn't it?
It really is. What about Fan Lei, her supposed lover?
Right.
Was he a real person?
Family was a real historical figure, but
Yep.
his role wasn't nearly as prominent as later stories suggest.
Okay.
He's mentioned in some sources,
Uh-huh.
but not as a key player.
Gotcha.
It seems Sima Qian, the historian who wrote Records of the Grand Historian,
Right.
romanticized family based on legends and tales circulating centuries after the events.
So he gets elevated from a minor figure to a wise, strategic mastermind.
Exactly. Sima Qian was known for his dramatic flair and
Right.
seemed to favor these larger-than-life characters.
So if Xishi isn't in the early records,
Yeah.
when does she first appear in relation to the Wu-Yue conflict?
Her story starts to emerge in later texts like The Spring and Autumn of Wu-Yue
Okay.
and The Lost History of You, written during the Han Dynasty.
Okay.
But even then, she's not the sole player in the beauty trap.
Oh.
She's sent to Wu with another beautiful woman named Xing Dan,
Okay.
and her backstory is, well, not quite as glamorous as later versions suggest.
Okay, now I have to know.
Yeah.
What was Xishi's profession before she became this legendary spy?
She was a firewood seller?
A firewood seller.
Yeah.
That's not exactly the image of a femme fatale.
Not quite, no.
I'm picturing her wielding an axe, ready to chop her way into the Wu palace.
It does paint a rather different picture, doesn't it?
It really does.
It's not until the Wei and Jin dynasties, centuries later, that she becomes the more familiar image of a girl washing yarn by the river, adding a touch of poetic beauty to her character.
So her portrayal evolves from a strong, hardworking firewood seller
Yes.
to a delicate figure by the river.
Precisely.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What about her fate after Wu falls? Are there different versions of that too?
There are. The most popular is the romantic ending,
Oh.
where she sails off into the sunset with Fan Li.
Okay.
But the food industry prefers a different version.
The food industry.
They like the one when she drowns.
She drowns. Why would the food industry prefer that ending?
Well, it's hard to sell a delicacy called Xishi's tongue if she's happily living out her days with her lover.
Oh, right.
The tragedy of her drowning adds a certain flavor to the dish.
Wow, that's a bit dark.
A little bit, yeah.
So even Shishi's afterlife is subject to interpretation and maybe even commercial interests.
It highlights how historical narratives, especially those passed down through oral tradition, are often a blend of fact and fiction, shaped by cultural values, changing perspectives, and maybe even a desire for a good story.
That's really interesting.
Yeah,
It seems like there's a lot more to uncover about Shishi and the other beauties.
there is.
What else did you discover in those sources?
Well, it really makes you wonder, why do these stories, even with their inaccuracies, continue to fascinate us?
Yeah, it's a good question.
I think it's because they tap into something deeply human.
Mm-hmm.
The stories of the four beauties, that they speak to our fascination with beauty and power,
Right.
and how those two forces intertwine.
It's like a cautionary tale
Yeah.
reminding us that beauty can be like a weapon,
Right.
a source of both strength and destruction.
Yeah, exactly. And the Xishi story in particular
Yeah.
reveals a lot about how history gets remembered and retold.
Okay.
The regions of Wu and Yu where this conflict took place were considered somewhat backward during the spring and autumn and warring states periods.
Okay.
There weren't a lot of written records from that time.
So it's kind of a historical blind spot.
Yeah.
People knew like a conflict happened, but the details were fuzzy.
Precisely.
Uh-huh.
But later, as these regions became centers of economic and cultural prosperity,
Okay.
there was a growing interest in their history.
Right.
And because there was less concrete evidence to go on,
Yeah.
it left more room for imagination and creative storytelling.
It's like a blank canvas.
Yeah.
Where people could fill in the gaps with their own interpretations, maybe even like a bit of local pride.
Exactly. And that's why today you find so many historical sites associated with Xishi
Right.
throughout the Jiangsu Zhejiang area.
Interesting.
It's a testament to the power of storytelling and how it can shape our understanding of the past.
It really is. Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. But let's go back to that point about Wu and Yu being considered backward
Right.
during the time of the conflict.
Yeah.
The source mentioned something about social hierarchy and how it makes the whole Xishi story even more implausible.
Okay.
Can you explain that a little
It's
bit?
a really intriguing point.
Yeah.
Where King Guizhan,
Okay.
after being defeated by King Fuchai,
Right.
offers to send women from Yu as compensation.
Okay.
But even in this desperate situation,
Uh-huh.
he's very careful to respect the social hierarchy.
Interesting.
He proposes that the daughters of nobles be sent to serve the nobles of Wu,
Okay.
the daughters of scholars to serve the scholars of Wu, and so on.
So even in defeat, maintaining that social order was paramount.
Absolutely. And that's why sending a commoner like Xishi, a firewood seller, to seduce the king of Wu seems so improbable.
It would have been a huge insult.
It would have.
Yeah.
Not a clever strategy.
Wow, I hadn't thought about it that way.
Yeah, it really changes the context of the story.
It does.
Yeah.
If this romanticized version of Xishi is mostly fiction, what do you think these stories about the four beauties are really trying to tell us?
If we connect this to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
it seems these stories, even with their embellishments,
Right.
tap into some very human themes.
Okay.
They remind us of the complexities of human relationships
Mm-hmm.
and the often unpredictable consequences of ambition, desire, and political maneuvering.
And the fact that they've been retold and reinterpreted for centuries
Right.
suggests they continue to resonate with us on some level.
Yeah, definitely.
We're still grappling with the same questions about beauty,
Yeah.
power, and their impact on our lives.
It's also fascinating how the image of each of the four beauties has been shaped and reshaped
Yeah.
over time to fit different cultural values and expectations.
Right.
Think about how Xishi went from a firewood seller to a girl washing yarn by the river.
Right.
That shift alone speaks volumes about how perceptions of beauty and femininity have evolved.
It's like each generation projects its own ideals
Yeah.
onto these figures, making them both timeless and a reflection of their own time.
Right.
And the fact that there are multiple, even conflicting versions of their stories
Yeah.
just adds to their mystique.
It does. Yeah, that's a great observation.
Thanks.
It brings us back to the question of why these stories fascinate us, even knowing they might not be entirely true.
Right.
What do you think draws people to them?
I think we're drawn to the mystery, the
Yeah,
possibility that there's something more to these women than what's recorded in the history books.
right.
Maybe it's our own desire to believe in the power of beauty,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe it's a reminder that history itself is a tapestry woven with threads of truth, speculation, and imagination.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Takes.
And it's important to remember that these stories connect to broader themes in Chinese history and culture.
Okay.
The idea of a beautiful woman being used as a tool for political gain is a recurring motif.
It reflects the power dynamics of the time,
Yeah,
showing how women were often pawns in the games played by powerful men.
exactly.
Yeah,
And it's crucial to acknowledge both the allure and the potential harm embedded in these narratives.
I agree. So besides these four,
Yeah.
were there other women considered like paragons of beauty in ancient China? Is there anyone else that we should know about?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. There were definitely other women celebrated for their beauty.
Okay.
One example that comes to mind is Lady Li,
Ladylike.
the consort of Emperor Wu of Han.
Okay.
She was renowned for her grace and elegance,
Uh-huh.
and her story even inspired a famous poem by Sima Xiangru,
Oh, wow.
one of the great poets of the Han Dynasty.
Oh, I love Sima Shangru's work.
Oh, yeah, me too.
It's so evocative.
It is.
What was special about Lady Li's beauty? Was it just like her appearance, or was it something more?
Well, she was known for her slender figure, delicate features,
Okay.
and especially her long flowing hair.
I see.
But it was more than just physical attributes.
Okay.
Lady Li was also admired for her intelligence, her musical talent,
Wow.
and her ability to compose poetry.
So she was like a Renaissance woman of her time.
Exactly.
Beauty, brains, and artistic talent all in one package.
All in one.
And her story is kind of an interesting contrast to the Four Beauties.
It is, yeah.
Lady Li was loved and cherished by her emperor.
Right.
While the Four Beauties are often depicted as like tragic figures,
Yeah.
used as pawns in political schemes.
Right.
Or ultimately meeting unfortunate ends.
It's true.
It's almost like their stories reflect different societal values.
It could be.
Lady Li represents like a more idealized view of womanhood,
Right.
where beauty and intellect are celebrated,
Yeah.
while the Four Beauties highlight like the darker side of how beauty could be exploited and manipulated.
That's a really insightful observation.
Thank
It
you.
shows how these stories can reveal a lot about the cultural anxieties and aspirations of
Yeah.
different periods in Chinese history.
This whole deep dive has really made me rethink my assumptions about beauty
Yeah.
and how it's been perceived throughout history.
Uh-huh.
It seems like it's never just about appearances, but about power, societal norms,
Right.
and even storytelling itself.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder if there are similar figures in other cultures
Yeah.
whose stories have been embellished or reinterpreted over time.
It's a good point.
Like, are there Four Beauties equivalents in other parts of the world?
That's a great question. Are there any examples that come to mind?
Well, figures like Cleopatra of Egypt
Uh-huh.
or Helen of Troy in Greek mythology come to mind.
Right?
Their stories have been told and retold for centuries,
Yeah.
often with conflicting details and varying degrees of historical accuracy.
It's almost like a universal human impulse to create these larger-than-life figures who embody beauty, power, and intrigue.
And to use their stories to explore the complexities of our own lives and societies.
Yeah.
What does it mean to be beautiful?
Right.
How does power corrupt? What
Mhm.
sacrifices are we willing to make for love or for our country?
It's so true.
These are questions that resonate across cultures and time periods.
It seems like even though we might never know the true stories of these figures,
Right.
their enduring legacy lies in the questions that they continue to provoke.
Exactly. And their stories remind us that history is not a static collection of facts,
Yeah.
but a living, breathing narrative that we constantly shape and reshape through our own interpretations and perspective.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive.
It has.
I feel like I've learned so much, not just about the Four Beauties, but about the nature of history itself.
And that's what's so exciting about exploring history. It's not just about memorizing facts,
Right.
but about engaging with the past in a way that challenges our assumptions and sparks our curiosity.
I couldn't agree more.
Good.
To everyone listening, if you enjoyed this deep dive into the Four Beauties, keep asking questions, keep digging deeper, and keep exploring those fascinating and often surprising stories that make up our shared human history.
It's a great big world out there.
You never know what hidden gems you might uncover.